Hey, welcome back to another episode from Operation Evil. This is Nyoka.
This is Rachel.
And today's story, we're going to go and put a big trigger warning out there. There is a lot of violence. This is close to home if you're from Northern Kentucky. It's a very disturbing, detailed story. So this is your warning now. And also, this will be a two-parter episode. So hopefully, though, those that are in the highest tier on our Patreon, which if you're not part of that yet, you should definitely go check that out. You can find our link on our Facebook page for sure. And probably other locations where the podcast is too. I believe it'll be in the show notes. So if you have tier 3, the highest tier, I'm going to release the second episode early to you. So that is just a little extra love and thank you for being part of our Patreon family. And today's case is going to be about Sergeant Robert Palmer. He was with the Elsmere Police Department in Northern Kentucky. And I'm going to have Rachel here start us out.
Okay, so the story starts with Barbara Palmer. In the 60s, 19-year-old Barbara meets John Bundy at a Frisch's restaurant in Erlanger, Kentucky. When she first meets him, she thinks he's just normal, just like any other guy. Time goes on and they get married. And things start to unravel very quickly. He was a bit of a jealous person. He would accuse people thinking everyone was flirting with Barbara. She couldn't even take a bath for like 3 years because he said that a neighbor was watching her. John worked as a truck driver, and one time when June Carter Cash was in town, he chauffeured her. And supposedly when June promised to make John a star and didn't follow through, then, Johnny Cash became this devil persona to him. He said that Johnny Cash was a demon from hell, the voices of gods and avenging angels, urging him to destroy anyone who got in his way.
Wow.
Yeah. So Barbara was afraid to leave, and she was afraid to stay. She, in my words, she just kind of, I would assume she felt just doomed. So, she did what any loving wife would do. She helped take care of him. Maybe she saw that he had some mental issues, and she was trying her best. And they did have 2 kids together. And it was also said that when they would visit Barbara's family, John would only go with her like family holidays. That was the only time that he would go with her. And at one point he had threatened her with a gun, threatened her at gunpoint for 3 days. And he would talk to the devil and beat on the floor. People at times would think there was something wrong with Barbara because, they almost couldn't believe that he was that crazy. They're like, is he okay? And she would just kind of like brush it off, like whatever.
Yeah, it's like, oh, he's not serious, or
exactly. Yeah. And so people didn't believe
fine.
her. Yeah, thought he was joking. So like I said, as time goes on and other things start to happen, John gets arrested for breaking. Actually, he shot out these windows in a home in Elsmere, which is a residence close to, where it's actually, It is in the city where they were living.
Yes.
And he also threatens Barbara's parents. He says, if anyone gets hurt, it's your fault, not mine.
Wow.
Can you believe, saying that?
Oh, he threatened to hurt her parents.
Yeah.
And if he hurt her parents, then it was Barbara's fault.
Right.
Not his.
Yeah, taking the blame off of him and putting it on her.
Wow. Yeah, that's disturbing. So she probably stuck around anyway because of the kids and probably afraid for them to be left alone with them.
And let's mind you, because I don't think I've said any dates yet, that this was in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
Actually, this would have been even sooner when she
Yeah.
was married to
It
him.
would have been in the 70s
Yeah.
and 80s.
You're right.
Yeah.
Before, domestic abuse was well talked about and educated and things like that. So
And mental illness.
right, yeah. So when John shoots out these windows, he ends up getting taken to the hospital, and that's in like 1980. So he gets hospitalized, and he had spent like 30 days in the Air Force. So he was eligible to go to one of the VA hospitals. He went to the one in Cincinnati, and at a later point, he went to the one in Chillicothe, but he ended up coming home. So we'll get into his story a little bit more in depth later. But like I said, Barbara, she was married to him for 16 and a half years, and she did her best. And they ended up getting a divorce, and that's what brought her to Robert Palmer.
Yeah, so that was just a little background, important information you need to know. So Barbara and Bobby, they got married on May 3rd, 1990. I believe that's when they got married. Anyhow.
I think it was 89.
Oh, 89, okay. But I will say that their son Casey was born in 86 and their daughter Robin a year later. And that same year, Palmer made sergeant. So that was awesome for him.
A lot of interesting things for this new family.
Yeah, it's like all kinds of good stuff going on. And I mean, from what I understand too, like Barbara thought she was always stuck in this crazy, chaotic marriage with John. So this is like her savior, like her Prince Charming, like her happy ending.
And it really, he does seem like he is.
Yeah.
Her knight.
So they got all this good stuff going on. Now Robin, who's the daughter, she's the youngest. She had like the pixie hair. It was light brown, and she just melted even the most stoic hearts. Casey, the little boy, he wanted to grow up and be like his dad. He wanted to be a policeman. And he would play in the front yard with a badge that Elsmere Police Chief William Hyler had given him. And his peace car and plastic radio.
I thought that was so cute.
That is adorable. And he would dial 199 instead of 911.
So evidently his father, probably his mother too, taught him the importance of not playing with that.
Yeah. So it's cute because he's like, he's wanting to be like his dad. Now, I will say a lot of this information, before I continue, is from an article called By Reason of Insanity by Mary McCarty. And I just wanted to point that out because this article is absolutely worded pretty great. I don't know. Yeah. I couldn't, out of everything that we read, and we read a whole lot, I felt like this article was, I don't know. It just needed to be read in its entirety.
Yeah.
It was very important.
Yeah, very in-depth and very, I mean, we just can't speak our own words. These words are better.
These words are great. So that's just a little bit about the kids. They're young. I think they're 2 and 3 at this time. And before we get into the afternoon of September 3rd, 1990, Labor Day, didn't you say me and Rachel was talking about this before, that the family had went on a vacation?
They had went like the prior week, I believe it was, to Indiana for a family reunion.
Okay. So they did get together with all their family. That's nice. Yeah. Okay. But on the afternoon of September 3rd, 1990, on Labor Day, everything was going to change. John Bundy, Barbara's ex-husband, he pulled up to the residence, got out of his vehicle, and he was carrying a .38 caliber revolver. Barbara and Robin, at this moment, they were watching TV in the living room. Bobby Palmer was asleep in the back bedroom after working a night shift. He was a third shifter. So he was asleep at this time. And Casey was in the front yard playing, doing what he normally did. So, okay, back to Bundy. He pulls up to the residence. He's got his .38 caliber revolver. He went into the residence. So he went past Casey. He walked into the residence. Barbara saw him and fled to the bedroom with Robin trailing. Bundy then fired the weapon at them, missing Barbara but hitting Robin in the leg. Casey peered through the porch door, and at this time, Bundy swung around and shot Casey through the door, and the bullet pierced his chest and killed him instantly. Then Bundy knelt and shot Robin, laying wounded on the living room floor through the back. At this time, Bobby is awakened. He grabs his gun, which is a 9mm, and exchanged fire with Bundy in the hallway. Palmer hit Bundy 11 times with a semi-automatic handgun, twice being shot in the chest. Barbara rushed to Robin's side. Robin cries out, "Mommy, I want up." She was talking. I thought for sure that she was okay, recalls Barbara, who can barely speak about her children. I was wiping her little face and trying to talk to her. It seemed like ages before anybody got here. It just seemed like forever. A surgeon, flown in by air care helicopter, operated on the living room floor, but it was too late. When police officer Benny Johnson arrived on the scene, he discovered Palmer standing in the doorway of the bedroom, holding his 18-shot pistol with only 2 shots remaining. Bundy, lying in the hallway, was pronounced dead at the scene. Palmer was rushed to the UC Medical Center where, due to the extensive damage caused by the gunshot wound, 2/3 of his right lung was removed. After Palmer's remaining lung filled with fluid, it forced the decision to move him to the Hershey Medical Center for an experimental implant procedure known as the intravascular oxygenator. I'm sure I said that wrong.
Some big words there.
Yeah. I think, too, from what I read, he may have been like the 12th person to even have this.
Yeah,
done.
I saw that it was fairly new.
Brand new. By performing this procedure, it gave them hope that this surgical implant will allow his lung time to repair itself, but his body just couldn't overcome the infection since the wounds were inflicted, and he never regained consciousness.
I mean, he was in an induced coma, right?
Yes.
And he developed sepsis.
Yeah. Yep. So that is currently the scene. And it just, reading this, it's just heartbreaking what he did.
And he's heroic.
Yes.
So we ask ourselves, how could it happen? More than a year later, the question reverberates through Barbara's mind as piercingly as the echo of the gunfire. It haunts Bobby Palmer's extended family as well, which includes, spiritually at least, the close-knit 9-member Elsmere police force. And, those of you that don't know, Elsmere is kind of someone that we currently work with describes it as like a, what is it? She calls it a Mayberry, like a Mayberry town. Like it's small. It's very small.
It's a small police force.
Like, just picture like a little town hall where everybody just kind of comes in and talks for hours at a time. Everyone knows everyone's name. So the question is more than philosophical. The survivors want to know what's wrong with a mental health system that can't identify and treat the violently mentally ill. And again, mind you, this is in 1990. So we've come a long way, and we still have long ways to go.
Yes.
They want to see it that patients such as John Bundy aren't so cavalierly released. The issue consumes Chief Hyler, a man in the sensitive tough guy mode of Norman Schwarzkopf, which I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. Do you?
I do not.
But I would just picture a big guy that he's a police chief. You don't want to mess with him, right?
Right.
With his 50s buzz cut and redling bulldog face, he could be the prototype of the hard-nosed small-town cop if his puckish blue eyes didn't betray him.
Aw.
That's a cute description.
I like that.
And this is a quote from Chief Hyler. I think every day that Bobby is going to bounce through that door. Fiercely protective of his men, Hyler doesn't hesitate to hug. They hug me back, he says. If something happens to one of these kids, the last thing I want to remember is that I hugged him and showed some expression of love and concern. I do love these guys. So I don't think that these guys ever had a doubt that their chief had their backs, you know?
That's wonderful.
He continues to say, if it's possible, this has brought us even closer together. They were out there working when they were hurting, and they held together so strong and magnificent. We came together as a family and drew strength from each other. For Hyler, family means Barbara too. Quote, I'll be there for her until I take my last breath, or until she tells me to go away. I gave her a promise I was going to stand beside her for as long as it took, even if that's forever. Hyler stands beside Barbara as she demands accountability from the Veterans Administration Medical Center in Chillicothe, which, you know, like I said, we'll get into more detail, but that's the hospital where John Bundy was released from. The hospital contended that where Bundy resided as a psychiatric patient for 6.5 years, you know, that they just failed miserably. With his history of violence, threats, and auditory hallucinations, Bundy, diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, never should have been released.
Wow. So the Chillicothe, did I say that correctly? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. The VA denies responsibility. Discharged in April 1989, Bundy lived as a private citizen until the killings a year and a half later, according to spokeswoman Kitty Heiss. He was seen last as an outpatient January 2nd, 1990. We were never alerted to any recent threats or to his deteriorating condition, and we are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I'm sorry, but do you really think a paranoid schizophrenic is going to think to call?
Or stop in? No. So it doesn't matter like how often you're open and what your hours are, but that was quoted from a VA official. So VA officials could have evaluated Bundy and initiated proceedings to commit him through county probate court. Heiss says VA officials insisted Bundy was a voluntary admission who could come and go as he pleased. They're the experts. They should have recognized this man was a danger, Hyler counters. They didn't do their jobs, and I hope that they have trouble sleeping at night. The VA did nothing illegal, but they failed in their moral obligation. That was a quote from Hyler as well. Others caution the issues aren't so simple. It's extremely difficult to predict whether someone is going to be violent, says Glenn Wessenberger, a University of Cincinnati law professor.
Is it, though? Is it?
I know. Quote, when some harm occurs in society, people would like to blame somebody, but we can only ask so much of doctors. It would be wholly unreasonable to ask for clairvoyance. An institution or a physician is only liable in a release if they fail to live up to the state standards. In Ohio, the process is a careful one that balances all competing interests. If we place a higher burden on physicians, more and more people would be institutionalized unfairly, end quote. The VA emphasizes that locking up Bundy without medical grounds would have been illegal as well as unethical. Ohio law requires the institution to prove the patient is mentally ill, a danger to himself or others, and unable to control himself. Quote, according to law, we must put patients in the least restrictive environment possible, end quote, Houck says, adding that upon his release in April 1989, Bundy was not suicidal, homicidal, or hallucinatory and was considered competent. The law requires that cases of patients committed involuntarily be reviewed frequently, Houck says. There is, in other words, no such thing anymore as locking up a psychiatric patient and throwing away the key. Quote, for a long time, psychiatric hospitals would warehouse people. Our goal is to treat them and return them to society, end quote. No conscience exists among mental health experts about the requirement for involuntary commitment. Some agree that the law favors patients' freedom at the expense of public safety. Quote, the law needs to be revamped because it has gone too far in protecting the rights of the mentally ill, observes psychiatrist Glenn Weaver, who teaches a seminar on psychiatry at the UC College of Law. Quote, only when there are enough tragedies, enough John Hinckley's, I don't know who that is, and enough of our outcry will the law be changed, end quote. Current law confining testimony about the patient's potential dangerousness to the previous 30 days is too restrictive, Weaver maintains. Others believe that the law strikes a proper balance between the rights of the individual and society, and that public safety shouldn't compromise private liberty. Quote, it's unfair to make a patient's whole life an open book, says probate court referee David Pfeiffer. We are talking about sick people, not criminals. Once in a while, you do make a tragic mistake. But we live in a society where it places maximum emphasis on individual rights, end quote.
It's interesting to think, though, but, he says they're not criminals, but they can become criminals.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like in cases like this, and this is just my opinion, I'm no expert, I don't have a degree in this field or anything, but it seems to me it maybe a lot of these things are case by case. Mm-hmm. And looking at this guy's background, what he's done, how he behaves.
All the signs were there.
But what do I know?
All we can ever do is speculate.
Yeah.
So at the time of Bundy's release, he had resided in the VA's least restrictive unit, considered a transitional environment for nearly a year. He could come and go as he pleased until 9 p.m. He was pleasant, alert, socialized well, and adjusted to the nursing home care unit, Hess says. The hallucinations continued but didn't interfere with his daily functioning. A multidisciplinary treatment team, including a physician, psychologist, nurse, and social worker, evaluates the patient's readiness to leave.
Hold up. So they just said he was still hallucinating.
Yeah, but it didn't affect his daily functioning.
How is that not affecting anything? Okay, sorry. I just hit a button there for a minute.
I know it's frustrating. I know.
Yeah.
So hospital records call Bundy cooperative and pleasant to talk to. And another comment that I need to make is, if he was on medication, of course.
Yeah.
Of course he was.
Mm-hmm.
So John had a brother named Ted. And, Ted, he gave his opinion on the matter as well. And Ted speculates that John duped the VA. Quote, they say he was an amiable, is that how you say that word? Fellow, but that's crap. Quote, his brother says that. So, if that's all they saw in John, they must have wanted the wool pulled over their eyes. He was cunning.
Interesting.
Yeah. And like I said, if he was on medication, then that would make sense. He's going to be behaving.
Yeah.
Those impulses are seriously, those impulses or the symptoms of schizophrenia wouldn't be active as much, right?
I would guess so if you're being
That's
treated for it.
Right. Yeah. So, federal and state laws should provide more guidelines for releasing mentally ill patients. Barbara Palmer and Chief Hyler contend, and they are lobbying legislators for change. Hyler concedes people can be cured, but there must be a watchdog before release. And he used getting a DUI, for example. You must meet criteria before being released, and there must be a place for them to go before the person has to go, before they leave, like a setup facility, like a group home, something like that. John Bundy had no place to go. He never would have met the criteria for a DUI release.
That is fascinating.
It's a good analogy.
It really is. So there's no way he could get released from a DUI, but he got released from an institute, a mental institution.
Right. So Barbara also marvels that John could easily purchase a gun. She can't understand why it was so easy for that to happen. She said, it's easier to walk into a gun shop and buy a gun than to walk into a store and get a credit card. There should be a waiting period so a seller can check on the mental state of the buyer. Cincinnati's 15-day waiting period, in theory at least, would have prevented anyone with Bundy's history of mental illness from buying a gun. So he purchased the gun in Ohio, right?
I think so, and it was at a discount shop.
Yeah, and the receipt was still in the vehicle.
And when the application to purchase the gun, if it asked, do you have any mental illnesses, he obviously
lied. Yeah, what was it? The questions that were asked, he said no to everything.
Right. So, for Barbara, the killings marked the tragic final chapter in a long and frustrating history with the mental health system. In 1980, John was hospitalized briefly after shooting out the windows of their Elsmere home, which I think you touched on.
Yeah, some of this might be a little bit repetitive from the very beginning.
The terror only escalated after his return. He threatened to kill her parents, which you mentioned that as well. She was terrified for her two young sons, Eric and Aaron. She feared what her husband would do if he stayed, but feared even more what would happen if she turned him out. She said, I knew if I tried to leave, he might hurt the boys. All the rights were for him and not for us. So unless he did something wrong, the only right I had was to take care of him. And for 16 and a half years, I did that out of fear. The hospital let him out and said, someone has to take care of him, and that's you. You are his home. For 3 years, the boys slept in sleeping bags on the living room floor with Barbara, fully dressed, on the love seat in order to make a speedy escape if John decided to use the gun he slept with. Bundy taunted his wife. Quote, I can do anything I want because I'm a certified nut. There's nothing anybody can do to me, end quote. He did the grocery shopping in order to hold Barbara hostage at home. Quote, he always thought someone was flirting with me, Barbara says. For 3 years, I couldn't take a bath because he said the guy next door was watching, end quote. Bundy watched sporadically as a truck driver. Oh, he worked as a truck driver. He chauffeured June Carter Cash when she was filming in Kentucky and told his wife the country and western diva had promised to make him a star. And then when that didn't happen, that's when he said Johnny Cash was a demon and don't let them come back into town. And
so she was fearing what he would do to other people.
Yes. Yeah. So on Mother's Day in 1984, in the same trailer in which he killed Casey, Robin, and Bobby Palmer, 6 years later, Bundy blew off the left side of his face with a shotgun. He was permanently disfigured, and he spent 2 months at St. Elizabeth Medical Center North before being transferred to the Cincinnati VA hospital, and in October to Chillicothe VA. John's final years in the VA Medical Center are not nearly as well documented as those from his admission in October 1984 through late 1985. Documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request by Cincinnati Magazine contain numerous psychiatric evaluations during those first 2 years, but almost none afterward. The VA says all psychiatric records were released. The records contradict the VA's early statements to the press that Bundy's suicide attempt was his only previous indication of violent tendencies. In November 1984, a psychiatrist described him as remarkably dangerous, and not only to himself but to others, and reported that Bundy told him, quote, I don't want to kill anybody, but I want to be with my wife and children in heaven, end quote. A locked ward was recommended. The following March, another psychiatrist characterized him as a significant escape risk and violent risk with a long history of physical abuse of wife and children, as well as unpredictable violent behavior. The records contain numerous accounts of Bundy's hearing voices and talking with the devil and his multitudes. He told a nurse he shot himself when he, quote, couldn't stand the voices anymore, end quote, because they said terrible things.
Whoa. Early in his hospitalization, Bundy mourned, I don't have anyone to comfort me. And afterwards, he often spoke of resenting his wife's refusal to take him home. In June 1985, he made several phone calls to his sons. One was 16 and the other was 13. And he would tell his sons about conversations that he had with the devil and making implicit threats against their mother. Can you imagine, like, saying that to your kid and your kid having to hear that?
No. Mm-mm.
A social worker noted that the patient's wife and sons have lived in fear for their lives. So for Barbara's entire marriage. According to the VA, Bundy underwent family counseling and corrective therapy as well as individual and group therapy throughout his more than 4 years of hospitalization. Ted Bundy claims he saw no evidence of psychiatric care other than medication during his brother's last few years at the VA. So it sounds like they kind of started out heavy and strong with the care, and then maybe they thought he got better, so they just kind of slacked off.
Yeah, I mean, just gave him medication, sent him on his way.
Yeah. Unlike Barbara, Ted had no early illusions about John. At an early age, he sensed something strange and violent in his brother. He says, growing up, I perceived John as something of a bully until I got big enough to take care of myself. So I'm taking it that John was older than Ted.
Sounds that way.
Yeah. Once he bragged about having beaten up our father, and he got mad at me when I didn't like it. Although Ted's and John's children were close, he says that he shied away from John as much as possible. He recalls he talked to the gods, the devil, the avenging angels. I wouldn't put up with it. So, from reading that, didn't you kind of get he kind of like maybe didn't want his kids around?
Yeah,
their uncle.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Still, Ted felt a certain duty. And after Barbara filed for divorce, Ted became his brother's only regular visitor. Once a month, he'd leave his Erlanger home at the crack of dawn. Lump of dread in his gullet. Man. It's just, this whole thing is just terrible.
It is.
And he would go and spend the day with John. So, I mean, it's not like people did not care about him. They did.
Yeah, I mean, his brother could have just not done anything.
Right.
But he cared enough to reach out.
Right. He said that John liked to talk to small children. And he was kind of unaware that his twisted face frightened them, Ted says. He seemed to like children, and I don't think he was faking that. So, I wonder how often he was around children, though, if he was at this facility.
Well, he came and went from the facility, it sounded like, whenever he wanted. So it was probably one of those, his normal day-to-day. He's probably coming across
children here and there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that when reading that article, I thought that part was kind of odd and kind of, I don't know, like when it was put in there, like.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to build his brother's character a little bit by saying he did like kids. And maybe he just forgot how disfigured he looked, and that was actually, in a kid's eyes, that's like the boogeyman or something.
Maybe he looked like the boogeyman, but there was still a part of him somewhere in there that was good.
Yeah, he's just mentally ill.
Yeah. Good thinking, Nyoka.
Thanks. Don't take my word for any of this.
Oh, don't take our words for any of it. We're just...
Don't hold us liable. We're just talking.
So after being released from the VA hospital in December of 1989, John lived briefly in a halfway house near Chillicothe, where VA social workers continued to visit him. As John's power of attorney, Ted handled his finances and mailed his Social Security checks every month. The halfway house returned the check one day in January, saying that John had left. So, Ted receives it back in the mail like it didn't make it there or whatever. So Ted's like, what's going on? So he finds out that through VA records that he was discharged. And, Ted was not notified. Although the VA, I think there was records that indicated that Ted was notified.
Wow.
Yeah. But Ted didn't know.
Wasn't.
Right. Ted also charges the VA provided no follow-up care. He said the hospital released him on the grounds that he could lead a normal life on medication. And they had a damned obligation to make sure he stayed on that medication. According to the VA's Kitty Hess, the medical center released Bundy to a Chillicothe residential care home with a 30-day supply of medication. She says, quote, when he left the home, it was up to him to seek treatment. Just as if you or I were to decide to go to a private doctor. What? Finally learning his new address, Ted closed John's bank account mailed him a cashier's check containing the balance and begged John not to take any action until he could visit him. When Ted finally arrived, John had already purchased a $4,500 Dodge, I think it was a Charger, and spent another $1,000 that couldn't be accounted for. The apartment in Chillicothe, which was where John was staying, was bare, had no dishes, no utensils, no furniture. Ted urged his brother to return to the halfway house for free medical care from the VA. John refused, and that was the final straw for Ted. He said, quote, "I don't want to see you, and I don't want to handle your problems." But Ted kept his promise. Nevertheless, unsettled to learn John had bought a gun and moved back to northern Kentucky. He and his wife, Paula, shared their forebodings that John would kill or be killed. Quote, "John was very vindictive, and we were scared because we didn't know whom he would feel harmed by," Ted says. Clearly, the biggest threat was to Barbara.
So,
do you remember, though, how Ted found out that he had bought a gun?
no.
Me neither. Like, I didn't find anything.
That information probably didn't come to light until after the killings,
Oh.
when they were investigating it.
Oh, okay.
That's my guess, though. Because if I go buy a gun, no one needs to call my sister or anybody to tell them I did.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Paula Bundy told her former sister-in-law about John's release, and Barbara panicked, but Bobby Palmer didn't take the threat seriously. Quote, "Bobby was like a big teddy bear, always cracking jokes, and he never took anything seriously," end quote, his wife recalls. Adds Hyler, quote, "I'm not sure he ever felt John was anything more than talk." So it's easy to imagine that a burly 6'2" police officer wasn't intimidated by Bundy, 5'10" and 120 pounds at his death. Bundy had threatened Palmer at the Lions Club Festival in the summer. Palmer told Bundy to stay away from his family, and he considered the matter settled. He promised his wife that he took care of it. Barbara couldn't rest easy. For months, she wouldn't let the children play outside, but finally relented. Maybe Bobby was right. Maybe she was paranoid. And besides, this was no way for children to live. Bobby Palmer's miscalculation ultimately cost him his life, although not before a three-week struggle. He had lost 2/3 of his right lung, but he didn't give up, even after learning his 2 children were dead. Hooked to a respirator and unable to talk, Palmer doggedly signaled to nurses his desire to know about the children, rolling his eyes and pointing to letters in the alphabet to spell out words. Barbara told Chief Hyler that she couldn't tell her husband. For the first time in 28 years as a policeman, Hyler wasn't sure he was up to the task. He went to Bobby's bedside with Sergeant Timothy Green, a lifelong friend of Palmer's. Palmer was alert, so the chief took him by the hand. Sergeant Green asked, quote, "Bobby, do you want to know about the kids?" Palmer signaled yes, and Hyler said, "Bobby, I want you to look at me and listen to what I am telling you. The children didn't make it." Palmer's expression never changed, but tears rolled down the side of his face. "Bobby, you're gonna be all right," Hyler said. "You've got to toughen up and fight your way through this thing." Palmer gave a thumbs-up sign. Breaking the tragic news was, quote, "the hardest thing I've ever had done in my life, and I'd given death messages many times," end quote, Hyler recalls. As chief of police, I was called on to do something I couldn't pass on down the line for someone else to do. Bobby worked for me, he was my friend, and I loved him. You feel real empty and real alone when you have to break the heart of a kid who's laid on the line for you every day for 10 years. You hope you don't break his spirit too, because in the next breath, you have to encourage him. Okay, Bob, suck it in.
The next day, doctors placed Palmer in a drug-induced paralysis so he could fight infection and conserve energy. When he could no longer breathe without a respirator, he was flown to the Hershey Medical Center at Pennsylvania State University. And that's where you had mentioned earlier about the experimental device, the oxygenator. They hooked him up to that. I'm just going to read this other article here by Karen Auchter. Sergeant Robert Palmer of the Elsmere Police Department died at 11:15 p.m. on September 25th, 1990. Palmer's wife, Barbara, some of her family members, Chief William Hyler, and Sergeant Tim Green of the Elsmere Police were at his side at the Milton Hershey Medical Center in Hershey, Pennsylvania, when Palmer finally succumbed to the infection, which had riddled his body since being shot on September 3rd. Quote, "The final chapter has been written. He died with dignity. Now we'll bury him with dignity," Hyler said. Traffic on Dixie Highway in Elsmere came to a standstill as Sergeant Robert Palmer was saluted for the last time. More than 100 law enforcement officers from Kentucky and Ohio stood attention in the northbound lanes as pallbearers carried the officer into St. Henry Church. A U.S. flag draped the coffin.
Whew.
I know. Law enforcement officials from across northern Kentucky and southwest Ohio were at the funeral. They lined the streets. We wear different badges and drive different cruisers, but we're family, Hyler observes. When we buried Bobby Palmer and those children, a little bit of every police officer went into the ground with them. And it was said that they flew the flag half-mast. I can't talk for 30 days after that.
Wow.
And that they wore the black tape across their badges as well.
Oh.
After that. And then, like we had mentioned before, how he was part of the Lions Club. And this is a couple quotes from some of his cohorts from there. "The best way that we can honor Bobby was to take the responsibilities that were his and live them in our own lives," said Reverend Comer. Or I'm sorry, is it Comer or Connor? I'm sorry. Comer. In one lasting tribute to the officer who also was his friend, Chief Hyler said he would retire Palmer's badge number 1303. Another comment, the Erlanger Lions Club appointed a committee to help Lion President Bobby Palmer's family in any way the club could do so. There was a benefit hosted by a local night spot, the Vegas Club, and over $7,000 was donated by the community. After all the proceeds from the benefit, raffles, etc. was reported, the final count was over $8,000 raised by the community for his family. And one last comment. At the death of Lion President Bob, first Vice President Lion John Dunhoff served out the balance of the term. Even today in 1995, when area Lions get together, most likely you will hear a story about Lion Bob and his time among us. He is sorely missed. John Dunhoff is a well-known name around our little area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have heard that name.
Believe he's got an honor banner along Dixie Highway.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, I mean,
They really stepped up for him. Everybody
they
did.
really did. I mean, these are just, it's kind of rewarding to be a part of this because you hear these names and you don't know their stories. And then when you know their stories, it's just,
Yeah, breathtaking.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It really is. So a lot of Barbara's fight was buried too. She'd been staying strong for her husband. And now that her anchor is gone, at 43, she has a trim, youthful figure, but a stoic, slightly glazed eyes, as if something in her soul has shut down. Chief Hyler marvels that Barbara carries on. When he called Christmas Day, she was laughing a little and crying a lot, he recalls. I don't know how the woman was held together or how she faces the day. Barb is hard to read. I don't know the anguish or torment she endures when she closes the door, when it's just her and her memories, and emptiness and loneliness. Chief Hyler struggles to make sense out of the senseless. He asked his pastor, "Is it really true that the Lord has a plan for everything?" Even the man of the cloth was forced to acknowledge. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Hyler reflects, we as police officers realize we may die any day. I could have understood Bobby dying as a result of a gunfire or a triangle with John Bundy, but I can't understand why these two babies had to die. Ted Bundy, too, is having trouble making sense of his brother's life and death. Our first reaction was that we were glad he's dead, he recalls. Over time, however, he has come to see John as a victim as well, a victim of the system that couldn't cope with his mental illness. John didn't contribute anything to society, but he needed help, and he wasn't getting it. He wasn't going to have a good life, and he did have a life at the VA center, the best life he could have had under these circumstances.
Barbara is living with her parents in Erlanger, leaning on her large and close-knit family, trying to pull her life together. She can't resume her former occupation as a machine operator because of Raynaud disease. It's a neurological hand disorder caused by the machine's vibrations. Now she has a different job, making sure people don't forget. What happened isn't an isolated case, she says. Maybe if for some other family had taken action after losing a loved one, I would still have my family. If I can save even one family from going through what I've gone through, it will be worth all the effort. No legislative victory could erase her pain. Whatever the outcome of her efforts, Barbara must live out her private sentence. She can't look at photographs of the children. She can't talk about them for more than a few minutes. But I think of them every day, she says. I close my eyes and I see their little faces. I can't believe it's all gone. I can't believe he killed my babies. How could it happen? In the deepest sense, there are no answers. No answers to the mystery of how a human mind turns against itself and why two babies had to pay the penalty. No answers at all. And for the woman whose fate was cruelly and innocently linked with John Bundy's, no second chances.
Well, that is just heartbreaking. And I will say that I do want to throw something in before I touch base on another article. Let me pull this up. I'm sorry I wasn't prepared for this one. But while we're talking about Barbara, okay, so she used her good-natured spirit and happy disposition to get her through an unthinkable tragedy. Let me see here. Okay. She ended up dying in her sleep at her home from a possible heart attack when she was 56. she was a happy person, of course, after what happened. She stuck close to the family. She never, she really cared more about others than for herself. Her son, Jesse Bundy of Florence, said that she was happy-go-lucky. Also, let's see, she was raised in Elsmere and Covington, attended homes and Lloyd high schools. The homemaker spent the remainder of her life caring for her family and friends. She was a member of the American Policeman Hall of Fame and Citizens of Police Survivors. Survivors include her son, John Eric Bundy, and Jesse Bundy. So she passed, let me find what year that was.
Was it 2007 or 2017?
2004.
Oh, it was way off.
Okay, so her family was murdered September 3rd, 1990. She passed away September 4th, 2004.
Oh, okay.
So, and I'll post a picture. They have their gravestone on findagrave.com, and they're all together. So it's got Bobby Palmer and then the two kids and then her. So they're all resting in the same spot. Now, I did want to touch base a little bit on, there was an article that I found interesting about police officers' search for constructive response because the system had failed us. So, though someone will step in for him, no one will ever replace him. That's how the chief of Elsmere summed up the feelings of himself and the other department members. All of the officers are very upset, said Sergeant Tim Green, who worked with Officer Palmer for 10 years. He emphasized, "We're particularly angry at the system, a system the chief reinforced that let a lunatic like Bundy out on the streets to kill 2 babies and my officer. I hope they're having trouble sleeping, looking at children, and look the other way when they see a policeman. The milestone is around their necks and not ours." Admittedly bitter, the chief was directing his sorrowful reaction to the doctors in Ohio, who he blames for putting Bundy back on the street. And if he was only hospitalized voluntarily, as someone pointed out, steps should have been taken to put him there involuntarily so he couldn't get out. But the police department members want to do something constructive about this tragedy. They plan to find answers, to try to change the system. They plan to contact congressmen, state representatives, and anyone who will listen because the system failed to protect their friend and police family member. "I'm heartbroken. Bobby Palmer is a hero in my book," Chief Heiler tearfully communicated at the press conference. "There's no greater thing a person/officer can do than to lay down their life for their family and children. Barbara, Palmer's widow, Sergeant Green, and I will never get over this. I'll remember every time Labor Day rolls around," Heiler said. "He was loved at the department, and the community was well aware of his kindness too. Even to the juveniles he came in contact with during line of duty respect for him. The support for Officer Palmer and his family has renewed our faith in the public," the chief remarked. "Bobby taught to live during his long ordeal 110%, just like he was when he was working and with his family. We're only going to rectify the insane situation that caused this to happen," Heiler said. On this issue, he disclosed, "This is my last press conference. The chapter is now closed. Heiler welcomes anyone to call or visit the office for further updates." Heiler did a lot.
He did. Heiler said he will work with Barbara Palmer, the sergeant's widow, to convince federal and state legislators to change the laws that keep potentially violent people from hurting themselves and others. Elsmere police will apply for $100,000 in benefits for Palmer's family from a federal program for officers slain in the line of duty. Palmer was not on duty when the shootings began, but he responded as an officer. The department also will apply for a $25,000, a grant or a benefit from a similar state program. Hyler said such benefits will go to Barbara Palmer and to Brian Palmer, the sergeant's 7-year-old son by a previous marriage, Joyce. Brian's mother was married to Palmer for 14 years and shared custody of Brian. Brian adored his father and spent 2 to 3 days a week, sometimes more, with him. Joyce Palmer, 38, said, Robert Palmer was a good provider, paying child support for Brian, half his medical bills, and carrying his medical insurance. Brian spent Labor Day weekend with his father and with Barbara Palmer and their children, Casey and Nicole, at a family reunion out of town. Joyce Palmer picked him up at his father's home the day before the shootings. She said she wanted to thank the so many people who have shown support for Brian. Her family and Barbara Palmer's family have been mutually supportive. She learned about Palmer's death from Barbara's father.
Yeah, they sounded like very civil for being
like
ex-partners.
Close knit.
Yeah, and looking through the paperwork, I believe from what I read, and I don't know if you took it the same way, but it sounds like Brian was an adopted child with his first wife.
Yes.
And then when they did divorce, I mean, he let her have the house, and he didn't fight her on stuff. She didn't fight him on stuff. It really did seem like it was pretty civil. Now, obviously, we don't know, but
right.
Just from reading that,
it just seemed like he was a good old, just decent.
Yeah, he was taking care of his responsibilities.
Yeah, he wanted what was best for all of his kids and for people that he loved.
Yeah. Yep. So before we continue on and talk about John Bundy just a little bit more, we're going to take a quick break. So we'll be back in like 1 second for you guys. All right, guys, we're back. And Rachel's going to carry on with John Bundy.
Going to give you further little more in-depth details of him and his mental issues. John Douglas Bundy was born on January 30th, 1945. And at the age of 45, he died on September 3rd, 1990, of multiple gunshot wounds. So when Sergeant Robert Palmer shot John Bundy in self-defense and defense for his family, he shot Bundy twice in the neck, 4 times in the chest and abdomen, 4 times in the left upper extremity and shoulder, and once in the right lower extremity, believe in the leg. And then there was a graze on his right forearm. And then, as we talked before, he had a previous facial deformity where he had attempted suicide on the left side of his face.
Yeah, he was missing his left eye, right?
And there was a really thick and pretty good sized skin graft on that side of his face.
Which I will include a picture of him with the deformity and a picture of him younger without the deformity on our social media.
And the significance of that is just to show you, I mean, just he was a person. He was with a mental illness.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking of mental illness, there was an article about how he concealed his mental illness to purchase the handgun that he killed the family with. So federal law prohibits a mentally ill person from buying a gun, but all the person had to do was just check no when asked if he had any mental problems. And that's what he did when he purchased the chrome-plated .38 caliber handgun that he used to kill the Palmer family. So Bundy, who has spent years in a psychiatric treatment in hospitals in Cincinnati and
Chillicothe.
Thank you. Ohio, paid $119.97 on February 3rd, 1990 for the gun. He bought it at Hart's in Chillicothe, police said. Steve Burton, Hart's assistant manager, said Bundy showed proper identification and answered no to a series of questions on a federal form. Question E asked, have you ever been adjudicated mentally defective or have you ever been committed to a mental institution? He answered no, Burton said. Burton said he noticed nothing unusual about Bundy's application. The receipt for the gun was in Bundy's car the day of the shooting, said Elsmere Police Chief Heiler. Gun laws are not what they should be, said Sheriff Deputy Lieutenant Dave Large in Ross County, Ohio, where John Bundy lived. It's just like a felon. You can't sell a gun to a felon, but if they say they are not, there's no checking, Large said. Jeff Kipp, manager of All About Sports in Amelia, Ohio, which sells guns, agreed. If they answer no to everything, then you can go ahead and fill out the rest of the form, Kipp said. If they answer yes to any of these questions, you automatically can't sell them the gun. Kipp said there's no way to tell when a person is telling the truth. If they come in and they act normal as anybody else, we don't have any way of checking. I'm pretty sure things are not like that now.
No.
But at the time, that is kind of scary that they can just check no to everything and be able to purchase the gun of their choice. So I felt like that was very important. And I think Miss Palmer also felt the gun laws needed to be a little strict when it comes to this as well.
And maybe it's something that we can maybe put a link in to show what the current gun laws are.
Well, it depends on your state to state, too.
Well, yeah,
so you
true.
might want to check your state.
We can't just talk to Kentucky and Ohio.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just a little bit of what we do know. We do know that it's better.
Yeah, it is.
So John's brother, Ted, he was having a lot of difficulties as well with dealing with this, with dealing with the death of these children that him and his wife thought of as family. And then the death of his brother and the death, just the whole situation.
Yes.
He said, we knew when John left the structured environment, talking about when he left from the VA, that it was going to end in tragedy. It wasn't a question of who, it was a question of when, Bundy said. And he also said, we knew something violent would happen. We hoped he would just hurt himself. The system failed. This is not the first time, and I'm afraid it won't be the last time. In the aftermath of the shootings, Ted and Paula Bundy, Paula is Ted's wife, they are balancing grief over the deaths of the children they considered part of their family, like I was just saying, and anger about a mental health system that did not prevent their deaths.
That is tough.
And I think you might have mentioned it another part too, where Ted almost feels like that his brother was a victim as well in some ways because of the mental illness.
Right. Yeah, he had conflicting feelings for that, I think.
Yeah, it sounded like he was struggling very much so.
Yeah. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the views from John and Barbara's child. and how he felt about everything. So Aaron Bundy, when he testified, I'm sorry, you're going to hear my seat squeak. Okay. So when Aaron Bundy testified when he was 6 years old, he knew his father was mentally ill. Quote, "My dad said I could see through things, walls, and solid objects," he said. Mrs. Palmer said Bundy threatened to kill her, his own father, and others. Aaron Bundy recalled telling the VA staff, and I'm sorry.
Chillicothe.
Thank you. Gosh, what would I do without you?
Neither one of us can talk that well. Talking the squeaky chairs.
Yeah. That he was scared for his life and the lives of his mother and brother Eric. He told the staff that his father had held a gun to his mother's head. Miss Palmer said Bundy had threatened her during visits to the
Chillicothe.
Yes, and can I just record you saying that so I can press the button? When
Just hit a button.
And she stopped going. Eventually, she stopped taking his calls too.
Oh, so she was visiting.
Yeah, she was
him.
doing her wifely.
So that just reiterates more about, like,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So his own attitude pushed her away. She testified that she warned the VA staff and...
Chillicothe.
Okay, I was
Sorry,
saying
I left
Rachel,
you
come on now.
I left you hanging there.
You did. Of threats, and that she said she wanted Bundy hospitalized forever because she feared that he would kill her and her children. At least one social worker in 1986 did not seem to believe her, she testified. The defense kept hammering at Mrs. Palmer's memory, attempting to show that her earlier dispositions did not match the testimony she gave on the stand Tuesday.
That sounds like a victim, like, shaming.
It is. That's exactly what it was.
Did you see drunken, rageous threats and gunpoint and weird behavior, like the time he angrily shot at arrows through his Johnny Cash albums, made life with John Bundy a hell.
What?
His son and former wife testified Tuesday. We missed that in our...
We totally missed that one. Being scared isn't the word for it. It was beyond frightening, Aaron Bundy said during the second day of trial to determine whether the government is to blame for releasing Bundy from a mental hospital. Recalled coming home from a baseball game and seeing his father pointing a pistol at his mother's head. That's awful. Yeah, he held her hostage for 3 days at gunpoint and refusing to let her use the bathroom. Miss Palmer, who was married to Bundy, has sued the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for $10 million, contending the government failed to make sure that Bundy was not dangerous before he was released from mental treatment in February 1990. 7 months later, Bundy killed her husband, Elsmere Police Sergeant Robert Palmer, and their 2 children at their home in Elsmere. Bundy was killed in the shootout with Robert Palmer. Ms. Palmer testified Tuesday that Bundy was extremely abusive.
A doctor from the U.S. Department of Veterans, the VA, testified that he did not consider John Bundy's violent background before discharging the eventual killer from a nursing home in 1989. And we're talking about the halfway home. Or actually, is he talking about the Chillicothe facility?
I think so. So why didn't they consider his violent background?
Doesn't make any sense.
They didn't look at it at all, I guess?
I mean, there's tons of it there. Well, maybe like that other article said, that they didn't heavily document things.
Yeah, that's true.
Dr. Miguel Bonet said he focused only on whether Bundy, a mental patient, was presently homicidal or suicidal during their April 7th, 1989 meeting. So this was on April 7th, 1989, and the murders happened on September 3rd, 1989. He determined Bundy was neither. Again, if he's on medication.
Wow.
I can easily see how Chief Hyler was so passionately upset and angry and
Yeah.
wanted to fix this. Bundy was then moved to a VA monitored group home near Chillicothe, Ohio. So this is the the halfway home. He was discharged from there in February 1990. Or actually, so I said that wrong. April 7th, 1989 was this meeting with the doctor. September 3rd, 1990
Yes, that's what
was the murder.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, 7 months later. Let's see. Dr. Bonet, during testimony in U.S. District Court in Covington, said that Bundy reported that he heard the voices of demons, but the psychiatrist did not include the information in his report that discharged Bundy from the nursing home. So again, this is why, there's Ted Bundy and Chief Hyler and Barbara are saying, that the system failed.
Yeah.
For those reasons. Dr. Bonet said Bundy could tell right from wrong. The doctor said he skimmed Bundy's medical records, but he could not remember a 1984 report from another psychiatrist saying Bundy was remarkably dangerous.
Probably because he only skimmed it. Sorry, I sounded angry.
No, I'm there with you, girl.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It gets better, right?
Yeah. So, brace yourself. Everyone brace yourself. The social worker said she was following a quota, in quotations, for moving patients out of the nursing home to make room for new ones. Judge William Bertelsmann asked, and I believe this is,
Paula. Or, not Paula.
is it
Barbara.
Barbara or Barbara's mother? I guess Barbara.
That is her maiden name.
Yeah.
That they're using.
She asked, the judge asked her if the social worker actually used the word quota, and she replied with yes. Dr. Bonet testified that the VA recommended a 20% of 30% turnover of patients at the facility, and also said that's what they recommend, but you could say yes or no, he said. I don't know what that really
I think
means.
it's just a turnover percentage, so they were just moving people along. Basically. That's what I gather anyway.
There's a lot of stigma and a lot of bad things you hear about those kind of places, and then you hear good things too.
Yeah, I mean, even further back from my understanding, and I am, again, no expert in history or anything, but it seemed like people were institutionalized pretty easily, even when they weren't mental illness. There could have been just disabilities or whatever. And then they were locked up forever in shock treatments and all these things, awful things that people don't do now. So it went from that to the polar opposite. We're going to push this medicine on you, take it, keep taking it, get your refills. We're good here. On to the next.
Well, and from the little bit of knowledge that I have from reading up on some of the state hospitals that were shut down, that lost funding or whatever, is that laws for some of these patients changed where, that's where it had talked about the patient's rights.
Yeah.
So it's where's the fine line?
The patient had no rights before.
Yeah. And now
they had all the rights. But there has to be this medium to protect the community, I guess is what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
Again, we are no experts in this field. We're just giving our thoughts.
Disclaimers.
Yeah. So the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs was warned that a former mental patient owned a gun several months before he killed the 2 children and the father in Elsmere. According to testimony Wednesday, Paula Bundy said that she made a telephone call to the VA social worker in July 1990, warning that John Bundy was in Northern Kentucky threatening people. I was irate, she said. We wanted him committed. Her testimony came in the 3rd day of the trial in Covington involving a federal lawsuit against the VA. Barbara Palmer is suing the department for $10 million, saying the government failed to protect her family from John Bundy, her former husband. Paula Bundy, who was married to John Bundy in the early 1960s and is now married to his brother Ted. Yeah, you heard that right. She says she was terrified when she called social worker Ray Good on July 6, 1990. How could you let someone in this condition out, Paula Bundy said as she asked Good or Goody, I'm not sure which one. Paula Bundy said she warned that John Bundy was in Northern Kentucky with a gun and was threatening people and was talking about Satan. She also recounted Bundy's violent past. Bundy, who briefly served in the Air Force, was admitted to the VA hospital and released from the group home in Ohio. I said, here as we speak, someone is dead. Bundy said he told his wife. Ted Bundy said he was furious when he was told that his brother was on his own and the government would no longer provide his medication. Bundy said he knew VA wanted his brother to live independently, but he was opposed to that idea. John Bundy was a voluntary patient and was free to go when he wished, according to the VA. Earlier that day, U.S. District Judge William O. Bethrelsman warned lawyers that both sides stop devolving into irrelevant testimony. Bethrelsman's, I'm sorry, I know I'm saying that wrong. Warning came during testimony by Ms. Palmer, who admitted under questioning from the defense that she used $30,000 of John Bundy's Social Security benefits for herself and her children while he was in the hospital from 1984 to 1988.
When I read that, I was so mad because I was like, what does that have to do with anything?
Nothing. It has nothing to do with anything.
And it's contradicting, too, because there's another article that says that John's brother Ted was the power of attorney, so he had the check. You know, he would send the checks to John in the hospital.
Yeah, she probably, I mean, that was over 4 years. When you divide that up in the 4 years, that's nothing. That was just to probably literally feed and have shelter.
I mean, he's the kid's father, so right. By all rights, he needs to pay something.
Ms. Palmer said that she withheld the money because she didn't want Bundy to have the I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm getting tired here. To leave the hospital, buy a weapon, and harm her. Defense attorney Patricia Reedy said Ms. Palmer's actions made Bundy angry. This Social Security business, I don't feel has any relevance, he said. They're picking and choosing what they're arguing about in court.
Yeah, they're trying to find something to win their case, or to try to win, I guess.
Yeah, and I will say this. I'm going to end it with this. She won the lawsuit. And do you remember how much she got from her? I'm wanting to say 2-point-something million.
Was it 2.5?
I don't have the exact number in front of me, but that sounds about right. So she did win something, and the way I looked at it, I was like, one, good.
Yeah.
For her. 2, how are you ever going to function and work again anyway? You just lost literally your babies and your husband. Mm-hmm. I don't even know how I would function and get out of bed in the morning if it were me. I just don't know how she did it.
I know, and just everything. Like, my heart still hurts for her because I wish I could just find her and just,
I know.
in
And
the
say,
past,
I'm sorry.
yeah, and just say it wasn't your fault. There was nothing that you did that you could have done differently. Like,
Yeah. I know.
and then to kind of like just to give, so this other thing we found, it was written by Diana Henderson, and we're not quite sure if maybe she just did like a victim impact statement at the trial, or you know what this pertains to, but we just thought that this little article was really interesting and just a good
ending to part 1.
yeah. So I'm just going to read it, what she wrote. I, for one, refuse to accept the present justice system. Some defense attorneys, judges, and legislators keep finding new ways to reduce sentences and make life more comfortable for perpetrators. This is not the only way to stop crime and protect victims, and it is not the American way. All we are asking for is equal justice. It's time that we start protecting the rights of the victims as well as the criminal. If a totally innocent person like my son can be shot to death for no reason, and the court system does nothing to punish his killer, perhaps you should give him some thought as to what could happen to you or a loved one. I have received a certain amount of satisfaction with working with the Kentuckians' Voice for Crime Victims. At least I feel that maybe I can make a difference and keep someone else from suffering the way that I and all the people that loved Brian have suffered. Diana Henderson.
Wow. So we're going to end part 1 here. And just to give you an idea of what part 2 will involve, it will be witness statements, describing characters of some of the people involved in the story. It will be firsthand interview with Officer Benny Johnson, who responded. He was the first officer on the scene. So he will talk about his experience with that. I'm also going to touch base a little bit on guns and the weapons that the police carried then and how this kind of impacted the future of what they were carrying in the at a later date around this area for sure. So again, if you're in tier 3 and in our Patreon, you're going to have early access to this episode. If not, it's okay. You're going to get it next week. So don't fret. But if you'd like to be part of our Patreon community, please find us. The link will be on our Facebook for sure and on the show notes as well.
It's also in Twitter.
Yes, Twitter. And we're going to end it right there. So we will see you we will talk to you in part 2. Thank you guys.